Hi Luke, it's really good to have you on the show. Thanks a lot for coming along. How are things with you?
Hey Pete, thanks for having me. Yeah, all good. I think different country, different sport from the last time that we spoke, but yeah, all going well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was a while ago when we met up in just outside. Well, it was in Miami, wasn't it?
Yeah,
A couple of years ago, or yeah, or so. So no, really good to have you on the show. I want to jump straight in because you've had a really exciting journey in your career so far. So I want to go straight in there and just ask you, like, where have you come from, and how have you got to the position you're in now, and what is that role, and what does it look like?
yeah, sure. So uh, probably from start to finish, I won't sort of go into too much around the education. Did my bachelor's, did my master's, and then had some part-time jobs and internships in the UK, and then actually quite quickly got offered an opportunity to either do a PhD in S&C or specifically Olympic lifting, or to go out to Spain and work in sort of a startup tennis academy where I would be delivering, and I was starting just as a delivery role of doing S&C, and I did that for about a year, and then quite quickly, I think it was after about 9 months or so, it started to move into a position where I was the lead, and I had a couple other coaches, one full time, one part time, which I was having to line manage and lead, and that was sort of my first initial opportunity, but also sort of entrance or dipping the feet in the water of having to not just think about myself but also think about somebody else as well. After a couple of years of that, the team generally growing, starting to add an additional full-time S&C and a sports scientist. After a few years of that, then moved on to overseeing the academy. Became quite large, and overseeing the medical, the psych, the nutrition, the sports science, and the S&C, and while also traveling, 20 25 weeks a year as well on the tour, across the men's and women's. So that was across a 7 year period, sort of it just naturally growing and evolving. It started off just being, a coach on the floor and on the court, delivering, and progressively moved into something that by the end of the seventh year was really quite different. There was a lot less delivery, almost none, apart from the times when I was on the road. And a lot of sort of management and leadership around, an MDT. So after that, I had a really unique and amazing opportunity to move over to the States and work with the New York Mets as their strength and conditioning coordinator. And there it was quite unique in the fact that obviously I wasn't overseeing, a full performance support team, with multiple sort of disciplines or departments within. I was just overseeing the S&C space, but anybody who knows about baseball and player development is there's, anywhere between 7 and 9 professional teams spread across 2 countries in 2 different languages across multiple states. So it's a huge decentralized system, and you're trying to do that while also joining it up with the major league team, or relating it to here in the UK with football, a first team. But all of the teams are professional, so every single team has their own full performance staff. So organizing and managing that from top to bottom, and trying to link that up to the major league team was a really unique challenge, and a position where I was able to have a really big influence actually on the strategic direction of a really big organization. So I did that for 5 years, and in the last 2 years, again, my role sort of expanded, and moved into overseeing things, having more of an influence and shaping things across a wider performance perspective within the Dominican Republic, and also, being sort of project lead on putting together like a performance scouting. Not necessarily a department, but a project of utilizing multiple departments to try and inform how we go about using performance data to, within the draft. So how we use that data within our picks within the draft process each year. So that was more of what it looked like towards the end, and now most recently overseeing the performance science space within Chelsea's academy. So again, big player development pathway system across multiple teams, and overseeing S&C sports science and nutrition within that space as well. So that's sort of me from top to bottom and start to finish to where I am today. So, and also within that, first the first opportunity in Spain, then in America, now in England. So, sampling a few different countries and cultures along with that.
Yeah, no, you certainly gone in at the deep end and had quite a lot of responsibility from the start in terms of leadership, which I'm sure is largely down to your personality, your character, and probably your interest in and ability in the leadership side of things. You talked about having an influence on the organizations that you've worked with. Are you able to give any examples where your leadership has had an impact and you've been able to bring something that has really brought some change or a new direction?
Yeah, I'll probably touch upon a few stories of over the course of the 5 years at the Mets. And look, one caveat I'll say to this is, under no circumstances are any of these stories indicating that I did any of this alone. It's that we had multiple positions of leadership and we had multiple leaders. And a lot of this was done in conjunction with some very, very good and talented people alongside it. But I think one first story with the time at the Mets is, again, setting the scene. It was an organization that was storied. It had a big history, but it hadn't necessarily been successful for the in the previous few years. Um, Going in, there was a desire to try and take a different direction, to try and move things, improve injury rates, improve availability, and try and create a more athletic and dynamic roster. And athletic and dynamic player pathway as well. So we developed that ourselves rather than having to rely on free agency to go and buy that. And with that, stepping into the organization, without going into too much details, but it was historically quite a directive and didactic environment. So with that, there were coaches in that system that hadn't actually programmed for players for quite a number of years. They hadn't had the autonomy to do that. So, one quick way was understanding, okay, that's the landscape. For us to get to where we want to get to, that's not necessarily going to be fit for purpose. We need to do it differently. If we have a decentralized system, we need to have coaches that are really owning their program, really genuinely owning it, and are making decisions themselves as to what they think is best, and not necessarily having to run it through anybody else. So that was immediately was a change in direction. Again, that was a collective decision that was made, but one that I felt very, very strongly about. And I think along with that was probably also the introduction of technology. So with all of that, there was quite a lot of change that was happening. So I think it was important to, one, provide clarity in the direction that we're going in. Understanding that that's probably going to be a bit scary, and then ensuring that they are going to have support within that. Mistakes are going to happen. That is a non-negotiable. It is fully expected, and it's going to be okay, and they'll be supported through it. And then on top of that, actually genuinely putting in things in place, systems and processes which are going to help them and provide. There's two terms that I like to use for this. There's full autonomy, unrestricted autonomy, and then there's guided autonomy, which I call coloring within the lines. And the lines are either a little bit tighter, depending on the situation and the member of staff or group of staff, the team that you're working with, or the lines are really, really far apart and there's loads of space you can color within, but you're still coloring within a set of lines. And again, providing that, but then also providing the staff education. So as they got more autonomy and they started to become more comfortable with it, they also became more competent with it as well. As we got more technology and we started to see how we could start creating feedback loops between objective information, informed practice, monitoring, and having that loop being consistent. They knew exactly what were the key principles and what were the key pieces of information or data that they needed to look at quickly to be able to make an informed decision, and what were some of the decision trees we were using within that process. So, that was sort of an initial, first stage in terms of, trying to provide a clear direction, identifying some of the struggles we're going to have, identifying that, they're going to be supported with it, and then what are some of the things that are coming, now, what are some of the things that are coming next and later in terms of the support and education we're going to try and give them. And I think that within the first 18 months, that was across the first 18 months, really set us up actually to be, really successful as a wider performance department, but particularly within the S&C space later on in year two and year three and year four and year five.
That's a really, really good example. And I guess like if I'm listening to that with my leadership hat on, you, the way you went about that of having a vision of a new direction, you and other people, not like you said, it wasn't just you, but then rolling that out, you went through the process of setting up new systems and processes, and you provided support along the way. You gave guided autonomy, and so on. This kind of way of thinking and way of outworking your leadership, is that something that comes very natural to you, or have you kind of gone away and studied leadership, or have you got an interest in it, or are you just like naturally just good at these things?
I wouldn't say it's the latter. Oh, it's not the last one. Um, I think the answer to that for me is probably a mixture of all of it. So yeah, to probably be a bit vulnerable, like I was open, I was self-aware of the size of the space that I'd been working in previously within a tennis academy of, let's say, 14, 15 members of staff that I was overseeing across, four or five departments with, an athlete group of around 40 to a space within the S&C department that was essentially the same size as the 4 or 5 departments I was overseeing before, and an athlete group within the organization that was 300 plus, and a tennis academy in the south of Spain versus a $4.2 billion organization in the States in New York. So I knew that I was taking a jump, and I contracted some external help from somebody that I trusted, that I respected, and that I knew that they could put the mirror up in front of me and say, these are some of the things that maybe you're not aware of that you need to go away and look at and think about. So I had paid external help from somebody that I found that I trusted, particularly around reflective practice and around leadership, to help me problem solve some of these things, and to ask me some challenging questions. So that was something that I've used not around that one particular topic, but I've used across multiple topics now throughout my career from 2017, to today. That particular topic was something that I was sort of working on and using somebody to help me with throughout, from 2017 to 2020 to the end of 2020. So that was quite deliberate. I was also very, very lucky with the people that I was working with at the Mets. I think probably the further away I get from that experience, the more I understand how lucky, and the more appreciative I am actually of the space and the pool of people that I was working with. It was a super unique environment. It was a clear direction. It was a blank slate. It was an open canvas to build and draw something exciting. And there was a load of people that were all brought in at the same time who were all very, very good within their respective areas, but had one thing in common, or two things in common. They wanted to build something great, and they wanted to work together, not separately. And we had really, really good leaders within that. So I was really, really lucky with the people that I worked with who were all thinking in similar ways, and we all challenged each other.
No, that's really good. I mean, that it certainly helps when you've got people on the same page in terms of what you said, want to build something great and want to do it together. That helps. But I know there would have been some real challenges along the way, and I want to talk about challenges in a minute. But I really liked what you said about getting help. A lot of people either A, don't talk about it, or B, don't get it, and aren't willing to go out and pay for external help. And I think it's good for some of our listeners to hear that, because I get questions all the time from younger practitioners or people moving up into leadership roles, saying, what can I read? What course can I go on? But not everyone thinks about mentorship or getting help, and paying for somebody to help them with reflective practice or problem solving or asking them difficult questions. And it takes some a level of vulnerability, like you said, and also humility to do that. So thank you for sharing that, and I think that's good for really good for our listeners to hear. I want to talk about some of the challenges that you've faced along your journey that in and I'm sure the example you gave just then had plenty of challenges, but can you think specifically of some of the challenges that you've had to face, and how that maybe shaped your thinking or your leadership style or your way of working, and how that impacts how you are now?
Yeah, there's probably a combination of a few different stories to link it towards maybe how my style has evolved and where I am now. But there was a period over the Mets where it was quite challenging. Um, Generally, over those sort of 5 years, there was a lot of instability. I think we had, this is all public knowledge, by the way, but we had five farm directors, which is the baseball term for heads of directors of player development or VPs of player development that oversee the entire system. We had, I believe it was five general managers, which is the equivalent of a sporting director. And then within that, we also had multiple managers as well. So with each one of those regime, those are two of the most important positions within an organization. Oh, and sorry, on top of that, we had two owners across that 5 years as well. Um, so that is a huge amount of real, genuine regime seismic change that's happening on a consistent basis. So to build something and develop something throughout that is challenging in itself, because one, the ground is always moving underneath you a little bit, which can sometimes create a bit of fear, which can sometimes stifle either innovation or progress. And on top of that, you're always having to deal different different leadership. Often comes um, different visions of maybe how performance can impact the wider organization goal. And we switched between two different goals, and we only ever talked about two, and it was either win now or win later. And win now means that we're going to trade away our talent to for free agency and to pay money for stars that are now, or we're not going to do that and we're going to focus on winning later, and we're going to keep all of our talent and we're going to prioritize developing them. Um, so we had clarity in terms of where we were, and we also had clarity in terms of how performance could fit within that from an availability and a capability and a playing style perspective. Um, but each time there's regime change, there's different views in terms of what that looks like, and also the level of importance of performance within that space. And to across the board, we were very, very lucky with every single one of those different people that were sat within those leadership. We were very lucky, but change is always tough, is always hard. So you're constantly having to always sell. Essentially, you sell to get an idea across, to get buy-in, to get traction, and to get freedom to go and work and be creative and innovative. That's challenging. And I think there was one particular period where the vision and the purpose of the performance department, particularly the S&C department, was maybe a little bit different between what we'd been supported on before versus the direction that we were going in. And that had some implications to some of the X's and O's of the work we were doing, but also how maybe certain members of staff within the performance department were viewed, and therefore they're also, longer term stability within the organization. And I think what that taught me was essentially that if you're in a position of leadership where you are able to go to the people at the very top and have conversations with them, you have a very strong level of responsibility, which you can't underestimate, because you're speaking for a lot of people that don't have that opportunity to do so. And I think it's easy to look at that and think, oh, what a great opportunity I have to be able to showcase what I can do and what I'm capable of doing to the person at the top. And sure, it's okay if you think that, but at the same time, you've also got to be able to think, well, I also have to make sure that I'm showcasing what the entire department and what all the staff that sit within that, what they're capable of doing and why they are hugely valuable and why we need to make sure that we keep them. And we also need to make sure that we value them appropriately. And every conversation you have is also a conversation you're having for others, not just for yourself. Um, so that was something again which, probably started to change my viewpoint and my way of thinking and, my leadership style further down the line.
That's good. I mean, that selflessness is really good to hear. And um, I've got a course on leadership that I run, and I talk about that kind of selflessness because you don't always see it in sports. You know, a lot of people just want to showcase themselves, and they're just thinking about their own path, their own reputation, and so on. So I think that's a fantastic example of, really leading your people well and representing your people well, and that brings a lot of respect to you as a leader. So great that you did that. In terms
I,
of
I think,
leadership, sorry, go on. Yeah,
sorry to interrupt. I think one thing that
no,
I'll say on that, maybe just to clarify it a little bit more, is the landscape can sometimes really depend on how someone approaches that. So, um, when somebody loses their job, or if somebody loses their job, and you feel that you maybe could have done more to prevent that from happening, that really, really crystallizes it for you.
mm,
And I'm not necessarily saying that happened to me, but it was always an option. It was always a possibility. So then that really crystallizes the weight of responsibility that you have. Whereas in other countries and other environments where maybe that's not quite as easy for that to happen, it's a lot easier to just not think about it because that consequence potentially isn't there. So it's easier just to think of self and not necessarily think of others. But when that consequence is potentially there, I think if you're not thinking about it, then that's really not a good sign.
mm. No, that's good. Good way of bringing it to life as well. Um, like as we know, leading is challenging in any field, and in sports, we learn from leaders in other fields, in business and education and so on. But what do you think are some of the unique challenges of leading in sports, maybe? And can you share any ideas, thoughts, or examples on, what's it like as a leader in the sports field?
I think well, I'm probably a little bit biased because of the different countries and sports and, American sports versus academies and so on and the different levels. But I think it very much depends on the culture of the country, the sport you're working with, whether it's more academy pathway or whether it's more at the sharp end and you're really at the sharp end, the knife's edge of it. Um, Instability and change is always challenging for all the reasons that I mentioned. Um, Generally, if you're more in my experience, at least, I think if you're more in the sort of academy pathway space, it's generally a lot safer. But sometimes that can be overplayed and it could potentially manifest maybe in a lack of, creativity and innovation. Um, Whereas at the opposite end, you can also have the same thing that stifles both of those. You can have something different that stifles those two things of being creative and progressive and innovative, because you don't necessarily want to do that because you don't want to risk losing your job because you're right at the sharp
Mm,
end. So I think it's trying to find some ways in which you can put your head on the pillow at night and know, okay, I've got a real clear, sound rationale why I'm doing what I'm doing, whether that's just in your own space, in your own job, and from a delivery perspective, or it's a wider leadership strategic perspective. But there's a clear rationale. It's well thought out. um, the risk versus reward has been weighed up, and there's also shared accountability. And so there's multiple people that have had their say in terms of either what's delivered to a particular player on a particular today, if it's a leadership, if it's a delivery role, or what strategic direction we're going in, and why we're going in that direction, and how quickly do we move the needle in that direction as well. So um, I think those are maybe some of the different challenges across different spaces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you talked a little bit about cultural differences. I know this is a little bit of an aside, but like how is sports maybe different in the States to the UK or to Spain? Have you got any kind of instant thoughts or reflections that you know that jump out maybe?
Um, I think the speed is different across all three, and also what's valued from a personal interaction perspective and from an output perspective. Generally in
What
Spain, it was a
I was going to
sorry.
say, what do you mean from a personal interaction perspective?
Um, so small things like how long you stop to say hi, goodbye, how are you, how was your day, how was your weekend, what's happening with this, what's happening with that, versus hey, how you doing, and then moving on to your next thing that you've got to do that day. Um, Generally in Spain, it was a slower pace. Um, even to the point where you obviously you had the siesta in the middle of the day, where there's a couple hours where not a lot's happening. Um, and there's generally just a less of a focus on things like start and end times of either sessions or meetings, things like this. Um, but again, the flip side to that is some of the delivery is incredible.
Mm,
Um, America's much faster paced. Again, these are all just experiences of mine. It's not to speak for countries or entire cultures, but I
mm,
wouldn't want to
mm,
do that. But in my experiences, it's faster paced. Um, if somebody asks you how are you, it's maybe it's less frequent, but it's really really meant. Um, if you're going to stop, if you're going to ask the question, you stop, and it's a genuine conversation. It's one that you get into, but it's one that's asked maybe a little bit less. And it's much more of everybody's busy. We're all just going bang, 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 and the day's being delivered. And it's much more. There's much more of a focus on execution. Um, and I think in the UK, it's maybe somewhere in between in terms of the pace. And again, there's probably much more social interaction on things. And if it means that you're a little bit delayed on X, Y, and Z because you've had those social interactions, it's maybe a little bit more okay. Whereas it's a little less okay if you're late for anything at any point in time in the States.
mm. That's interesting, interesting, and like you said, that's kind of unique to your situation. But yeah, just interesting for you as an individual to have to adapt to different cultures as well. And I know from having worked overseas in different countries that coming back to the UK, there can be some reverse culture shock coming back to your own culture because you've got used to other cultures, and so um, I'm sure you've been through some of that as well. But yeah, I want to jump to looking at some of maybe your models or structures around leadership. So I guess I wanted to ask, are there any particular models that you find really helpful in certain contexts or any frameworks that you've used in other areas that you think, when I come across this situation, I use this kind of framework, or any rules of thumb that you subscribe to on a daily basis? And I kind of want to unpack that, what is it behind you as a leader, and have you got any kind of structures that you like to use?
Uh, yes and no. So I probably should have mentioned this maybe earlier on. I think when we talked about the mentoring piece, but I did a course, by from Oxford University on executive leadership. So I have also formally studied it as well. I did that more towards the end of my time at the Mets, and I found it hugely useful actually to more so as like self-validation of it made me actually really reflect on the experiences that I'd had and what I picked up on what I picked up throughout that period of time rather than necessarily giving me a whole bunch of different X's and O's that maybe I didn't necessarily
Mm,
have before, but it helped crystallize my reflections on a lot of the experiences that I'd had, and some of those are stories that I've told, during our talk now. But obviously, part of that course, there are a lot of models, there are a lot of frameworks. In all honesty, I don't follow any of them. At no point in any of the in the day or in any experience have I ever thought of any one of them or referred back to any one of them or even had any of them in my head. But there are some set principles which I do consistently think about, um, which I think are important, and maybe these are a framework or a model in itself, but I think it's really important that you're authentic. In a position of leadership, if you're not, whether it's the person that you're trying to get, you're selling to, let's say, for a lack of a better word, it's maybe a bit crude, but you're trying to sell an idea, a
Mm.
direction, a vision to. If you're not being authentic in the way in which you're doing that, they're just going to smell that immediately. And then, no matter how good the direction or vision that you're presenting, they're not going to believe in you because you're not being yourself. And it's the same also for staff that you're trying to present that to as well, not necessarily leadership that's above you. It works in both directions. Um, Something which actually somebody said to me, which was really stuck with me, is being consistent is also very, very important. It's okay if maybe you're not the most outgoing person. It's okay if maybe, you're not the friendliest person in the world, but be consistent with whatever you are. If you're the great guy, you're the great cop, be consistent with that every single time. So then the people around you know who they're getting every single day. If you're not, and maybe you're a little bit more of a, to use an American term, a bit of a hard ass, then you're driving change and you're pushing people all the time. But just be consistent in that. Don't flip from that to then being somebody's best friend, because again, that impacts authenticity. So be consistent in your behavior so people always know what to expect. So again, you try and provide some stable ground, because ground is always shifting underneath you in sport because things are very rarely stable. So be consistent. Um, I think the next one is sort of two almost rolled into one, which is it's important to be proactive and clear. So whether that's around day-to-day communications or whether that's around bigger pieces of strategic direction and vision, be very, very clear with the information you're communicating and don't waffle, be concise, get to the point, and make sure that everybody is totally clear on that. And something that probably I've learned later on is don't assume that everyone's clear on it just because you think you've delivered it clearly. Check for clarity. Make sure everyone is clear on it, whether that's something that you're trying to sell to a person in leadership, that of a direction you think that the organization should go in, or whether that's something of an X and O in terms of what's being delivered to a player or a group of players, on that day. Make sure everyone's really clear
Mm.
on it and check it. Um, and a couple more is, one is being honest. Sometimes that can be devalued, and it also can maybe sometimes be packaged up as maybe being a bit of an arse. But I think provided you have somebody's best interest at heart, being honest is important. And so long as you communicate things respectfully, it is important. And I think one thing I've learned is it's okay to sometimes have a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. Sometimes if you're not honest with someone, maybe you don't give them an opportunity, or you're not giving them the choice of an opportunity for them to actually get better, because you're not telling them and giving them the feedback maybe that they need, because it's maybe a little bit tough for you to give it to them, or it's hard for them to receive it. But you still have to deliver it. If you don't, actually, you're putting them in a worse position, because they don't know they've done anything wrong, or they don't know they can do it better, because you've shied away from having an honest conversation with someone, which really needs to be had. Um, and in leadership positions, they need to be had really quite regularly. Um, and the last one, which is probably more of a piece around teams, is having consistent feedback loops. So brief the day, and again, be clear and be consistent with the communication. Make sure everyone is clear on what the plan is for the day. Debrief the day, review it, get everyone's viewpoint and thoughts on it, and again, check for clarity, and then have that feed into the next day. That can be the same for objective data. It can be the same for reviewing strategic direction. That's a principle that goes across many, many different things. But those are some of the things that I regularly think about and think, okay, well, have I done this? Or do we need to do this more? Or do I need to do it more? Do we as a collective team need to do it more?
That's really good. And I like it, like to be able to base your practice around, a set of principles, is really helpful. And I think, like you said, you don't subscribe to any particular models out there. You've studied them, you know what they're about, but you've got your kind of guiding principles, your values that are important to you, and you've got reasons that they're important because they impact the people that you're leading directly. And so, no, I really, really appreciate that. And it's good to see. Yeah, it's good to see how those have kind of been developed. And is that something that, obviously, you've done your course at Oxford Uni and you've studied, you've obviously had your mentorship. Is this something that has kind of developed over time, or do you think you were doing quite a lot of this naturally at the start, or like how have you kind of really developed? I want to go a bit further into how you've kind of developed yourself as a leader.
It's quite a hard question.
Yeah, it's not that clear.
No, no, no. It's clear. It requires a lot of reflective practice to sort of maybe be clear in my answer. I think a lot of it has happened just naturally over time with the experiences that I've had.
Mm,
Um, there was a lot of change over the 7 years of which I was, working in Spain. My role changed many, many times. And with that, I had different, poignant moments or events or stories which shaped, sometimes failures, which ended up shaping maybe how I go about viewing something, next. I think for the majority of the time I was actually in Spain, I was just sort of learning as I go without any sort of real structure or clarity, or for a lack of a better term, framework to work from. Um, I think particularly once I moved to the States, I was surrounded by a lot of very, very good people that thought in this way. So I very naturally started to move in that direction as well. And I also had some external help that was helping me dissect some of it and actually go through reflective practice, not just on my own, but with somebody else as well, to help me understand, okay, well, why has this event or why is this situation currently bothering me? Why is it bothering me? And what value is it touching upon me that is unsettling me? And what am I learning from that? What responsibility do I feel here? What has gone wrong here? What was the reason why this went wrong? Let's think about it, let's unpack it, and so on. And I think, at first I was doing that a lot with somebody that was external. Towards the end, it was happening with the people I'm sat next to and sharing offices with. We were all in similar positions and all feeding towards, a collective strategic direction. So I think a lot of it, some of it was, for a large part of it, it was organic. It was happening just on
mm,
my own, but I couldn't maybe verbalize it. I couldn't put it into any coherent language to communicate to somebody else. I had some help over a period of time from somebody else to help me maybe make some sense of it. And then having an environment which made me genuinely live and breathe it and communicate it on a daily basis, weekly basis, I think also really helped.
oh, that's good. Um, I think I said it before, but we have a lot of listeners who are on a journey and are wanting to, really understand what they need to do for themselves to improve their leadership and move into more positions of responsibility. And I think just being some of these stories that you've told and just being really open about it is really helpful. And so really appreciate you sharing that. I think one of the things that really sticks out for me is it might seem obvious, but you've been quite intentional about getting people to help you and ask you questions and kind of talk you through situations. And you've been very aware of learning from experiences. I think all of that really, really helps. And so, you've been proactive as well to go out and ask people and learn. And I think all these things are important because people often think, this just falls onto a plate and everyone's just naturally born a leader. Yes, I do believe that some people have tendencies towards leadership. But every leader I've spoken to puts the work in, goes out and gets help, and and works on themselves. Uh, as we're talking about kind of working on ourselves, are there any kind of leadership figures that you look up to, or any good books that you've read, or any good, other than the study course you did, any other courses or material that you've absorbed, or any mentorships that you know of? Just kind of, is there anything that you can point people towards that could be helpful, or something that you found helpful in your own journey?
I would say I would say the course that I did with Oxford was very, very good. I think it can be helpful for those that have amassed a lot of experience or some experiences in leadership positions to help clarify some of their reflections, or maybe clarify maybe a new or slightly altered direction that they want to go in. Um, but for me, the number one thing is the work that you put in and how much you're willing to push. No one's going to knock on your door and give you an opportunity. No one's just going to stick it in front of your lap and put it on put it on a nice plate with a knife and fork there and say, "Here's a lovely meal. It's going to make you better. Go and eat it." You've got to go out and get it yourself. And sometimes, the positions that you're in, oftentimes I hear a lot of things, "Oh, my position doesn't allow me to do that." Sometimes that's the case, but a lot of the time it's actually the barriers that we set within ourselves that, well, my title says this, so this is all I have to do and deliver. But you can think outside the box. You can offer more outside of your role, provided you're willing to do the work. And I want to be a little bit careful with what I say there. I'm not necessarily advocating for people to work and do just way above and beyond what their job is and just get totally and utterly taken advantage of by their employers, which unfortunately in some cases maybe does happen. And you do also need to have an element and a level of self-worth and respect for yourself to not let that happen. But you do also need to go out and go outside of the box and go and grab opportunities and try and take advantage of them. And when they're not falling in your lap, go and get them, go and search for them, go and look for them, and find what works for you. The catalyst for me, actually, for going and finding someone external initially was within that reflective practice and leadership space, and then ended up becoming two or three other areas totally different to the first one. Was I just was not getting any benefit from conferences, workshops, all of these things. I just wasn't getting any benefit from it. I was, it wasn't changing what I was doing. It wasn't changing and adding skill sets to me. If any, what I was mainly getting out of it was actually just networking opportunities, which is great. It puts you maybe in front of someone, but once you're in front of someone, that's just the first step. You have to have some substance to be able to actually then make an impact and have an impactful conversation, have an impactful interaction, a lasting one that someone remembers, for you to create then a real connection with them that's helpful for them and helpful for you, or maybe, to get you a job. Whether that's an informal interaction or whether it's a formal one at interview level, there's got to be substance to it. And I felt like it wasn't giving me that. So again, I thought, okay, well, this isn't working for me. So what can I do? And I just thought, well, this is someone I respect. I think they can help me. I'm not exactly sure 100% what this might look like, but I think I'll be able to help figure it out with that person. So let's give it a go. And I think you do just have to try and be proactive and just take the initiative yourself and just go out there and find it and get it. Give it your best shot.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love what you said about having substance, because um, we've all met aspiring people who, there's just not a lot there, and then you meet somebody who's really impressive, and there's a lot of substance there, and you're like, wow, you've put in the work, you know what you're talking about, you you know you've got all the kind of professional side, but you've also got the humility, the honesty, and all the other values that you talked about. And when you get that match of somebody who has that substance behind them and has got something to offer, then it makes an impact. And I'm sure that's how you've managed to get where you are today. And so yeah, fantastic that you were willing to look outside the box and go, these conferences aren't giving me everything, and I need something else. And great for our listeners to hear that as well. I just want to look at kind of the future. Where do you think things are going in kind of sports performance leadership? Can you see any trends or patterns, or have you seen the direction change over your time in sports? Um, any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I think again, I think it's culture dependent, culture country
Mm.
dependent, because every culture is different, so the direction and the evolution of that is going to be different with each one. But I think as a general, there's much more data, there's much more technology entering in. It's impacting many more conversations with leadership now than it has done previously. There's more of an awareness of its value. It's much more embraced. So I think how well you can use data to create a create clarity and illuminate a story and illuminate a either a performance problem and then a performance solution, and how well you can communicate that is going to be more and more important further in the future. I think it's already important now, but it's only going to get more important. And I think also the makeup of the staff that sit within an organization is probably a bit different now with the younger generations, and also on top of that, I say that like I'm old and I'm it's not like I'm 60 or 70 years old myself, um but I think with with every generation that comes, it's obviously a little bit different. um and on top of that, I think since COVID, there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of how people view things, what they're willing to do or not willing to do. The working environment has generally changed a little bit. And I
Can
think
you give
with
a
that,
quick example of that for people who might not know what you mean?
just
How's it
small things in
shifted, maybe?
just small things in terms of the amount of hybrid working hours there are, the number of hours in
Right.
office versus not, how present you are, how important that is versus not important, how important it is now versus how important it was before. Maybe the level of tolerance as somebody within the workforce to maybe doing and persevering with something that's maybe not something they're enjoying at this very moment in time, or maybe is they feel isn't giving them maybe what they want or need at this moment in time comparatively to before. So I think with some of those changes, I think one, valuing the person and investing in their development and showing them that the environment that they sit within is one which is going to help them grow. And also, if you are consistent, you are proactive, you're clear and you're honest, you can probably help maybe illuminate some of those things, in terms of there are going to be some areas which maybe aren't going to be the most enjoyable, and you're not going to enjoy every single second, but you're going to grow and you develop and you're going to get a lot better and you're going to be part of something that's going to be great and exciting. Um, so I think developing the member of staff, and not just assuming that that they should be grateful to be in that role and that they should be grateful to be wearing a set of colours and a badge, I think is something that's also going to change in the future and become more and more important to keep people on more of a longer term basis and to get the most out of them.
Yeah. No, it's great that yeah, that you're able to see some of the changes, well, the cultural differences between different places you've worked, but also cultural differences between different generations. And if you try to treat the younger up and coming generation the same way that you were treated or I was treated or so on, it's just not going to work. And having that ability to understand their psyche and their background and their worldview is really important as a leader. And otherwise, you're just going to lose your whole team and not be effective. So great, thanks for sharing that. That's really helpful, and good to hear that you're so aware of that. Um, have you got any sort of final advice that you would give to anyone who's an aspiring leader in the sports performance field? Maybe they've been a practitioner and they're getting more responsibility, or maybe they're, stepping up into a new role that involves leadership, or maybe it's something that they're really looking at for the future, that they want to, bring more leadership in their work. Have you got any sort of final thoughts or comments or anything on that in terms of advice?
Maybe some general bits, but I think it's all very individual. It's all very personal and unique to that
Mm,
person and the situation that they're in. But I think ultimately, try and be self-aware as much as you can. Be okay not knowing the answers. You know, no one knows all of the answers, and no matter what stage of your career you're in, there's going to be various points in time where you feel like you're maybe not doing the best job that you could, and that's also okay to feel that way. If you don't, then you probably have a little bit of an inflated view of yourself, I think, if you don't go through those emotions at some point at various stages, um, or maybe you're not testing yourself enough, and be okay asking for help. You know, just obviously doing it appropriately, you know, doing it in safe spaces, doing it with people that, you know, you feel are going to reciprocate that in the right way, and with people that can genuinely help you. I think those, and the last one is work hard. Um, you know, that's important. That's important.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you do work hard because it's been hard to pin you down to do this, but I can't say a big enough thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that you're working in an extremely demanding environment, and you've got time pressures, and so thank you so much for carving out the time to do this with us. So yeah, appreciate that. Anything you want to say in closing?
No, I think that that last part was probably the closing there.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Luke. Thanks again for your time. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing you face to face at some point soon, hopefully.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed the conversation.